Hi, I'm Madison Malone, and today we're discussing the latest result in the BDO Business Wellbeing Index. We know that business leaders are facing so many issues right now, here and globally. So we're going to discuss how they can tackle those issues now and into the future over the next 6 months, and also how the government may play its part in the upcoming budget. To discuss all of this, I'm joined by Kim and Alan from BDO. Welcome.
Hello.
And also Brad Olsen from Infometrics. Thanks for being with us, Brad.
It's great to be here.
Kim, I'm keen to understand in more detail the results of the BDO Business Wellbeing Index. Can you shed some light on those top findings for us?
So I think we all know that times remain pretty challenging out there for our business leaders, but the results of our latest 6-monthly BDO index are showing that we may have turned a corner in terms of some of our business metrics. So this is on the back of a pretty tough 2024 result. Both of our surveys in 2024 were at record lows. So we're now returning to more business sentiment at a level that we were looking at back in October 2023.
So what are those top issues that business leaders are concerned about now and into the future?
Yeah, so top concerns for business leaders at the moment look like those economic and political factors. There's a lot going on globally, which is having an impact. New to the top 5 of those key concerns is business growth, which is actually really positive to see in terms of business leaders. They're not looking at the day-to-day anymore. They have adapted their businesses and they're now starting to look forward and think of how they can grow. Workload is still a key concern, and as is cash flow. Things are still pretty tight.
Absolutely. How does that change if you look 6 months out? Is there anything that is added to those top issues?
AI comes through at that point. So that's when business leaders, they're really starting to look forward in the future. How are they going to leverage those technologies to help their businesses?
And what about specific sectors? What have you seen in that?
So agribusiness, really strong at the moment with those increasing dairy prices coming through. Both retail and tourism, again, quite positive in terms of how they've responded. Construction still looking pretty challenging, however, and we have a further survey that we would bring out in June that we'll look to seek further insight from.
Look forward to reading that. Brad, I'm keen for your thoughts on the findings of this index. Is this also what you're seeing out there in the economy, or were there some surprises in there for you?
These findings do gel with what we're seeing out in most of the other economic data. Things are still tough, that's absolutely true, but as Kim's highlighted, we're lifting off from a bottom. There is that recovery momentum starting to show through. It's not rocket ship to the moon, not every business is all of a sudden firing on all cylinders, but there is a bit more optimism starting to show through, and I think a shift from just trying to do the day-to-day to get through, your 9 to 5, to actually now thinking a bit further about expansion, about where things go next in the business sector. So that's important and encouraging. When you look at some of those sort of sector by sector results as well, very much gels in with a lot of the data we're seeing where the primary sector is driving both provincial and rural New Zealand forward. The dairy payout's in a good spot, meat prices are a lot higher, our exports of kiwi fruit and other horticultural exports, they're all in a way better place. That's pure money that's going through to rural New Zealand. And I think interesting as well, you start to see a bit of a north-south island divide come through. Tourism was also one of the areas that's been profiled. So better things on the whole. Construction's still tough. I mean, building consent numbers are lower, but I think there's also a little bit of hope and expectation that from a government point of view, there's a lot of expectations for further infrastructure investment. So everyone will be looking quite keenly, I think, at the budget for that.
And we are going to go into that, but just still on these macroeconomic factors, what else do you think could be fueling some increased positivity in the economy? Lower interest rates, I'm assuming?
Definitely. I mean, they definitely help, right? Both in terms of that fact that it's probably better for consumers because they'll have more money to spend on stuff that isn't just the mortgage, but also it makes some of those investment decisions a whole lot easier. Increasingly as well, though, people are a bit more confident that inflation is at a more stable level. It's still a concern, I think, for a lot of businesses. Kim profiled that one of the challenges still is around cash flow. People are keeping a cautious eye on their costs still. But with inflation now at a much more stable level, a bit lower, it's a little bit easier to, I think, plan for the future. So from a business point of view, always a bit of caution, always a little bit of worry, especially in this environment. But that's coming down, and instead you're starting to see a little bit of those greener shoots starting to show through.
All right, let's talk about that upcoming budget. Alan, you're going to be keeping a very close eye on every announcement come budget day. What are your expectations on what the government may do to respond to some of those key issues for business, but also capitalise on that positivity that we are seeing in the economy right now?
So good question. So the government's made it clear that there's going to only be modest support for growth in businesses. Given the operating allowance has been slashed from $2.4 billion down to $1.3 billion in 2025, any new spending initiatives are going to have to be pretty much self-funded from savings found elsewhere. So I think the government is not going to be splashing a lot of cash around to help businesses with growth. So given the BDO Business Wellbeing Index and having growth at the forefront of business leaders' minds, I think business leaders will be looking to the government to show some certainty around what their growth plans are for the budget 2025 to give business leaders confidence that there will be growth kind of later on in the year.
Certainty is tough right now, especially with tariffs in the mix. How could the government respond to the tariff situation, especially given the impact it could have on our export-led economy?
Nicola Willis has said that there's going to be no lolly scramble. So I don't think there's going to be a massive amount of targeted relief for kind of tariffs in budget 2025, and I'm not sure that the government can do that. One of the things that we'll have to wait to see is how they are going to respond, though. And given that there's not a lot of money in the tank to provide relief, so from a tax point of view, potentially some areas that the government could look at is providing some relief for asset purchases, maybe accelerated capital allowances, or even increasing the low value asset threshold, which is currently $1,000. So that's basically if a business buys an asset for less than $1,000, they can immediately write that off. During COVID times, that was $5,000. So one thing that could boost potentially growth at the moment is to have a targeted allowance, maybe going back to $5,000 to allow businesses to immediately write off the purchase of new plant and equipment. And that could be targeted in particular areas that the government wants to see more growth in. So that is one area. Other areas that they could possibly do is with the infrastructure kind of approach in mind and the desire to have a lot of private funding for infrastructure spend in New Zealand, is to look at the infrastructure settings in New Zealand to make it easier for non-residents to invest in those public-private partnerships, to remove any of the tax barriers that might be there for that type of investment. What they also might do, given there's been some recent consultation under the Foreign Investment Fund regime, they might just confirm what those changes are going to be. There's already been consultation on that, so there might not be anything that's blindingly different, but it might just be in the budget to confirm what those changes are. And similarly, there was some recent consultation on FBT changes, reimagining the FBT rules. So there's been consultation on that, which closed earlier this month. And one of the goals of that was to reduce compliance costs to help businesses focus on growth. So I could expect that maybe there will be something in the budget around what the government's decisions are on the FBT rules. But other than that, there's really no money in the tank to provide any other tax relief for businesses to help support growth or drive the economy.
Brad, these are very much details at the economic margin, but they are important details, as Ellen has spoken about. How much of an impact could they actually have on our economy in terms of boosting productivity, boosting GDP?
I mean, I think from a government point of view, they obviously want to see some of that economic growth, but they've got pretty limited levers. And so I think the focus, as you've just heard, is a lot more going to be around how do you support businesses to support themselves rather than government doing it directly. The government doesn't have the money to do that. And you look at some of those changes that could be made, they have a real impact on small and medium businesses in New Zealand. You know, changing some of those thresholds from 1,000 to 5,000, that means that if you're a small operator, you can start to buy a little bit more kit and you just have that ability to write it off a whole lot faster. So things start to move a bit quicker. You can start to make slightly bigger decisions as well, which, you know, when you're starting to hear a bit more interest from business themselves about wanting to grow, that's the sort of stuff that can just unlock things enough. And I think we've got to be realistic. The government is in a pretty constrained environment. They don't have the money to throw around. And so the Minister of Finance has been very clear that this budget is going to be a lot more around how is that little tinkering going to unlock bigger things. And probably unusually for a budget, it's not just about the dollars and cents. It is about some of those regulatory changes, tax changes and similar that help businesses sort of day to day. So I do think we're in for a bit of a shift this time. And if I'm a business, then I'm probably not going to be expecting the world. Let's be realistic here. But some of those changes could be sort of fundamentally different and just unlock that little bit more growth that keeps the whole thing powering on.
And to Kim's point, it would be a great time for that, given that your clients are now thinking about and strategizing for business growth. Ellen, our economy has gone through a lot, and I'm keen to understand if there are any lingering issues you think may need to be addressed in this year's budget, perhaps the fiscal deficit?
Yeah, so one of the areas that the government may look to increase funding for in budget 2025 is providing IRD with more resourcing. So despite many government departments getting a cut in budgets and not getting any increased funding, one area that the government could look to do is to provide more funding to IRD for audit activity. History has sort of shown that IRD gets a very good return on every dollar that they get. I think from memory, generally they get $7 back for every dollar that they spend. So from an audit activity point of view and from a government's point of view, it's probably money well spent.
So, Alan, should business leaders be preparing for something like that?
Absolutely. They should be expecting IRD audit activity will be increased in the coming months and should be preparing themselves for that.
Well, I look forward to watching your coverage come budget day, Alan. Considering that environment, Kim, what are your top tips for business leaders as they approach business growth now that that's back on the agenda?
Key here is to have a strategy. A really clear one, targeting your goals, understanding actually where you want to get to. Think about the environment you're operating in, all the circumstances that we've talked about so far, and create that targeted plan to get you there. Key is actually implementing that plan and making sure you're really measuring your KPIs and making changes to your plan when it doesn't appear to be working, and making sure when new opportunities arise, you can change tack to tackle those. The second key thing at the moment is thinking about changing interest rates and looking at your financing position. There may be changes and opportunities you can take advantages of with serviceability of debt. You may be in a stronger position with your bank than you might have been 6 months ago.
Very interesting point, Kim, on rates. Certainly something to watch in the economy. Brad, what's your forecast on the OCR and where it could go from here? Lower?
There are still further cuts to come. The Reserve Bank's pretty well signalled that. The question is there going to be even more after that? Jury's still out. The Reserve Bank's playing it close to their chest at the moment just because of how much uncertainty there is out there. But if economic conditions get worse, then the Reserve Bank can pull that one out. They can start to provide a bit more support, allow people to spend a bit more and start to invest a bit more as well. I think one thing, though, is that it's important that businesses don't just wait for government or the Reserve Bank to help them out. As Kim's highlighted, some of that is on business themselves. They need to be nimble, they need to be adaptable to what is an increasingly challenging global environment. That's totally true. But I think what's really encouraging is that from a New Zealand perspective, we are thinking about how do we trade better with the rest of the world despite all of this. You know, we're thinking about a trade agreement with India. We've had stronger relations recently and trade deals with the likes of the EU, the UK. There's a lot more happening in the Middle East. We are a small trading nation, and so it's encouraging that actually we're looking out for those opportunities. When they come along, we're grabbing them with both hands and we're running with them. There's a little bit of caution, a little bit of warning that we're still a bit worried about, though, thinking towards the future, is around migration. We know that there's a lot of New Zealanders who have left the country. They continue to do so. Australia seems to be a really attractive point. But at the same time, we've still got pretty high levels of people coming into New Zealand, despite the fact that the unemployment rate is up. So I think that migration challenge is still going to be one that will grip us as a country for a while. And what we've heard quite directly from the Reserve Bank and Treasury is that we can't just grow the economy through migration. We've got to think about productivity. We've got to think a lot more about the long term.
Some big things for us all to think about. Kim, are there any parting comments from you about how business leaders should navigate all of this we've spoken about?
So there is a lot of information in our report that we haven't managed to cover today, and I would really encourage business leaders both to go to our website where you can see further information and tips, and also to reach out to their advisors for more support as to how to navigate the big challenges.
Thank you so much for your time, Kim, Brad and Alan.